In some ways, however, the temper of scientific thought is far less managing and imperious than it was at the beginning of this century, if only because greater knowledge brings with it an awareness of ignorance. At the same time, even from the most coldly intellectual point of view, it becomes clearer and clearer that we do not live in a divided world. The harsh divisions of spirit and nature, mind and body, subject and object, controller and controlled, are seen more and more to be awkward conventions of language. These are misleading and clumsy terms for describing a world in which all events seem to be mutually interdependent. An immense complexity of subtlety balanced relationships which, like an endless knot, has no loose end from which it can be untangled and put in supposed order. It is not that spirit has been reduced to nature, or to what nature used to mean, or that the mind has been reduced to the body. We have less and less use for words which denote stuffs, entities, and substances, for mind and matter have together disappeared into process. Things have become events, and we think of them in terms of pattern, configuration, or structure, no longer finding any meaning in the question of what stuff is this pattern made. But the important point is that a world of interdependent relationships, where things are intelligible only in terms of each other, is a seamless unity. In such a world, it is impossible to consider man apart from nature, as an exiled spirit which controls this world by having its roots in another. Man is himself a loop in the endless knot, and as he pulls in one direction, he finds that he is pulled from another and cannot find the origin of the impulse, for the mold of his thoughts prevents him. He has an idea of himself, the subject, and of nature, the object. If he cannot find the source of the impulse in either, he is confused. He cannot settle for voluntarism, and he cannot settle for determinism. But the confusion lies in the tangle of his thoughts, rather than the convolutions of the knot. Yet in the present atmosphere of Western thought, the realization of man's total involvement with nature is perhaps depressing. It is humiliating for a culture which always used to think of man as nature's head and lord. Even now, despite ever louder voices of warning, the culture still revels in technical power. Contrary to its avowed philosophy of living for the future, its perspective is really no longer than the day after tomorrow, for it exploits the resources of the earth and the energies of radioactivity with only the most fragmentary knowledge of the complex relationships so disturbed. The apparently depressing thing is not merely that the universe is not to be pushed heedlessly around, but that the very state of mind in which we attempt to do so is an illusion. For if man is one with nature in a seamless unity, beneficent ideals must after all be rationalizations of the great primordial forces of lust and terror, of blind striving for survival, which we believe to be the basic impulses of nature. But before we decide to be depressed, we could learn to know nature from the inside. The discovery of our total involvement is momentous, so that the understanding of the character and inner working of the endless knot is the most important of all philosophical inquiries. As already suggested, we might find out that our not-ons of blind primordial urges are pure mythology. Might it not be that they are fashions in anthropomorphic thinking, which have simply swung to the opposite pole from the older notion that the primordial impulse was the will of a personal and beneficent God? The very ideas of impulses, forces, motivations, and urges may be nothing more than abstract intellectual ghosts, as impalpable as the mysterious it in the sentence, "It is raining." The same grammatic convention which requires subjects for verbs may be the sole reason for urges and drives behind actions. Yet such a line of thought may be even more disturbing, since it suggests a universe of life which has no motive at all, not even survival. And surely an absolutely purposeless world would be the most depressing of all possibilities. But the idea of a purposeless world is horrifying because it is incomplete. Purpose is a pre-eminently human attribute. To say that the world has no purpose is to say that it is not human, or as Tao Ching puts it, heaven and earth are not human-hearted. The sage is not human-hearted. For what is not human appears to be inhuman only when man sets himself over against nature. For then, the inhumanity of nature seems to deny man, and its purposelessness to deny his purposes. But to say that nature is not human and has no purpose is not to say what it has instead. The human body as a whole is not a hand, but it is not for this reason deny the hand. It is obviously the purest anthropomorphic to assume that the absence of a human quality in bird, cloud, or star is the presence of a total blank, or to assume that what is not conscious is merely unconscious. Nature is not necessarily arranged in accordance with the system of mutually exclusive alternatives which characterize our language and logic. Furthermore, may it not be that when we speak of nature as blind and of matter energy as unintelligent, we are simply projecting upon them the blankness which we feel when we try to know our own consciousness as an object, when we try to see our own eyes or taste our own tongues. There is much to suggest that when human beings acquired the powers of conscious attention and rational thought, they became so fascinated with these new tools that they forgot all else, like chickens hypnotized with their beaks to a chalk line. Our total sensitivity became identified with these partial functions so that we lost the ability to feel nature from the inside, and, more, to feel the seamless unity of ourselves and the world. Our philosophy of action falls into the alternatives in voluntarism and determinism, freedom, and fate because we have no sense of the wholeness of the endless knot and of the identity of its actions and ours. Originally, the ego includes everything. Later, it detaches from itself the external world. The ego feeling we are aware of now is thus only a shrunken vestige of a far more extensive feeling, a feeling which embraced the universe and expressed an inseparable connection of the ego with the external world.